Guys, hi guys. My name is John. I'm doing a quick little video on Duralube. Now, I'm not going to test it. I'm not going to give you any specifics, but I'm going to tell you what we used it for. Now, most of you know I was a manager for Disney, and I pretty much ran second shift. I was called a duty manager, and I was facilities 1 duty manager, and I ran everything from about 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock in the afternoon to closing. I always had to stay to closing. Now, later on in life, when I had a lot of supervisors, I would, after the park closed, I would finish my paperwork and get out of there. But for the most part, anything that broke down, any issue at all, people getting a splinter in their finger, anything that maintenance was required to fix or adjust or paint or whatever, it was under my cap that I had to do it. Now, in the summertime, I had a smaller crew because we were open till 1 o'clock in the morning, and I did not have time to do maintenance. Wintertime, we closed at 7 o'clock. I did a lot of maintenance between 7 and 11, whenever the time the second shift went off duty, which is about 11:30. It changed over the years once in a while, so it wasn't set in concrete. So anyway, running Disneyland pretty much by myself and a maintenance crew gives me white hair. Yes, okay, so that's where I got my white hair. When I was in my late 40s, it just turned white. So anyway, what I wanted to talk to you guys about is the maintenance we did at Disney and the products we used. Now, I'm sure a lot of you have seen Duralube ads and Duralube tests and things of that nature. Now, I'm not going to test anything, but I'll tell you what we did when at some point I became a manager in the 80s, the duty manager that ran the second shift park. I was responsible for building bogies of wheels on Splash Mountain. I'm sorry, Splash Mountain wasn't created until the 90s. So, Big Thunder, it was there. The Matterhorn, the Space Mountain, any maintenance that we had to do after the park closed at 7. We tore things down, put things together, did NDT work, sent out most of our NDT, but we had to tear the axles out of the Space Mountain cars and send them out to get them NDT'd, and they brought back, and then we put them all back together. Now, we never put anything together dry. Okay, the reason we didn't put it together dry is friction. It causes scarring, it causes grooving, it causes all kinds of bad things, and it definitely adds wear to your equipment. So we dipped everything, especially on my shift, we dipped everything in Duralube. We put all the bogies, all the wheels, all the drive shafts, all the shafts, axles, whatever, we put them all together. We dipped them in Duralube, and then we wiped them off and put them together. Now that gave us a nice slick start to any lubricant that was going to be used on, like the Matterhorn. It used a very special liquid lubricant, but we still put the bogies together with Duralube. Now, speaking of the Matterhorn, one night they called me over. It was on a Friday night, 5 o'clock. Everybody's gone in maintenance except me and a couple of supervisors and my crew. So they called me over, and one of my supervisors, a mechanical supervisor, John, we lost the gearbox on A side. I think it was A side. Now, you know, it's been a long time ago. I don't really remember. But we lost the gearbox on A side. So we ran up the lift, and the lift was pretty steep. It took a couple of minutes to get up there. And we opened, and I said, let's open it up, take a look in there. So the gearbox was about 4 foot square, and it was a pretty good sized gearbox. So we opened the lid. There was about 20 bolts in the lid, and we got to digging around in there, and we brought out some teeth, and the teeth were about this wide and about that high, and they were just broken off of the gears. And I let my machinist supervisor dig around in there and see what we could do to get it back running, because Friday night at 5 o'clock, you don't want to stop and tear down half the Matterhorn, and you want to at least run the other half. So it was important to get the thing running. So we put up some duvetine, a black duvetine, between the other side of the mountain, the B side, so we could run. You know, I think the transmission, the gearbox that fed that lift was B side, and I think A side was still running. So we shut down A side, put up some duvetine so no one could see us work, and we ran A side. So on B side, we went through all the grease, and it was pretty much grease. We pulled out all the teeth out of the gears, and there were about 5 teeth that we pulled out of that gearbox. And my mechanical supervisor came to me and says, "John, we've only got 1 tooth per gear missing. So I think this will run. It's going to be noisy, but I think it'll run once we clean it all out, so there's nothing going to get caught in there." So I said, "Well, if you think it'll run, I know what will help it run." So I had a case of Duralube in my office. Now, I left it in my office because this stuff disappeared a lot in maintenance, and if you didn't keep it in your office under lock and key, it disappeared. But anyway, I know it's one of those things. But we opened the gearbox. The gearbox was open, so we went and got this case of Duralube. Now I don't know how many bottles were in that case, but quite a few. I would say at least 8. So we dumped those 8 bottles of Duralube into the gearbox. Now the gearbox was pretty much grease, but I thought that the friction reducing properties of this Duralube, and we trusted it to build Space Mountain axles and all that stuff. So anyway, we dumped them in there, put the lid back on, and started running the lift. Made a lot of noise. Okay. After a while, it started to quiet down. So I said, "Okay, let's put some vehicles on B lift," and then it was B lift. We ran a bunch of B lift rockets, and eventually it quieted down. But every time a rocket would hit the lift, it would growl, you know, and then so that went on for about 2 hours, and finally it didn't sound too bad. So we got some sandbags, and we started loading about 5 rockets with sandbags. So and when those sandbag rockets hit that lift, it just really let out a growl. But after a while, it quieted down a little bit, and I thought, you know, we ran close to 3 hours now, and it's getting around 9 o'clock. If we're going to open this thing and get any use out of B-side, we need to do it. So my mechanical supervisor agreed with me. So we left the duvetine up there because I knew we were going to have to change out that gearbox. And I picked up the teeth, put it in a maintenance rag, and I took them back to my office. So we opened B-side and we ran all evening. So I had Sunday, Monday, Tuesday off. So that was Friday. So Saturday was one of my regular days because everything happened on Friday and Saturday. If it was going to happen, that's when it happened. So I was very lucky to be able to run the park when all that stuff happens. So anyway, it ran all day Saturday, no problem. So the third shift said we're two. When I asked them if they could change out the gearbox Friday night, they said no. We only got 3 guys on. We got all this other stuff to do, so we can't really take the time to do it. So I said okay. So it ran Friday evening, so I figured it would run Saturday, or it did. It ran Saturday fine. So I left a note for my boss, who works Monday through Friday, of course. When you come in, you need to set up maintenance on B-lift gearbox. It either needs to be rebuilt in place or it needs to be replaced, pulled out and the spare put in. So let me know. I'll be back on Wednesday. And signed, John. Okay. So Wednesday I came in and everything's going fine, and I walked into his office about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I said, hi, how did the gearbox change out go at Matterhorn? And he says, what gearbox change out? I said, didn't you read my note? He says, oh yeah, I read your note, but there's nothing wrong with that gearbox. I said, well, stand by. My office was right next door to his. So I walked out of his office into my office, picked up this rag of teeth, put it on his desk, went back to his office, put it on his desk, and said, well, that came out of the gearbox. Whether you think it needs to be changed or not, it's up to you. So, and I turned around and left. So about 5 o'clock that evening, I get a call from his secretary, and she says, John, I got a note here from the boss. He wants you to change out that gearbox tonight. So anyway, you can't win. So I did change out the gearbox. It was running so smooth and quiet that they didn't think anything was wrong with it, even though there were 5 or 6 teeth missing. So I think Duralube had a lot to do with that. I don't think it would have ran nearly as well without the Duralube and the grease mixing and taking care of the gear meshing and so forth. Okay, so that's just one little story. Another story about Duralube that I have is I had a Bronco. I bought it in '89. That's about the time I started being duty manager. So I would, of course, had drive-in privileges, so I would drive my Bronco in the park, and when the park closed like 7 o'clock, I'd drive it up and down Main Street. So a Bronco was nice and small enough, and it was a full-size Bronco. It's like OJ's Bronco. But anyway, it was a white one. But we started doing maintenance with the Bronco. Disney gave me a little tracker, a little Chevy tracker to drive around, and they said, oh, you could take it home if you want. So I just left my Bronco at the park and left the keys in it, and if anybody needed it for maintenance, they jumped in my Bronco and loaded gearboxes and everything else up in it and went out. So about 10 years that Bronco stayed in the park. It was a nice little white Bronco, and it ran great. So anyway, I kept oil changes, and I kept Duralube in it. One quart of oil, 1 quart of Duralube per oil change, and we ran up probably 150,000 miles on this thing, and I don't think we ever had any trouble with it. So anyway, I decided to sell it in the 2001 because I was getting ready to retire, and I actually didn't need it anymore. I had a Chevy pickup that I had bought, and I was using it. So anyway, a guy came out and said, "Does it burn oil?" I said, "No, it's never burned oil. It's done really well." He says, "Do you mind if I drop the pan before I buy it?" I said, "Go right ahead. You can drop the pan right where it sits, and drop the rod bearings and main bearings." And he said, "Okay." So he had pneumatic tools, and zip, zip, zip. He had that pan off, and the Bronco was a little high anyway, so we didn't even have to jack it up. It just slid under there and did it. So he pulls out the insert on one of the rod bearings, and that thing was like brand new. He says, "Did you replace these?" I said, "I haven't touched those. That pan has never been off. That was the original seal on that pan." He says, "My God, this is the cleanest engine I've ever seen. And there's no marks on that bearing. None." I said, "Well, we've never burned any oil. We pretty much religiously changed the oil and added a quart of Duralube." So that's one of the other stories. We put the engine back together and he bought it. So that was my Bronco. The the fact that Duralube has been around for a long time has helped. It was one of the only oil additives back then in the late 80s, early 90s. There's a lot more additives on the market today, Prolong and all these others, Best Line, and those are great additives. I'm not saying Duralube is better or worse. I am saying that Duralube does what it needed to do for Disney and for Disney's managers, me. And when we had a cracked axle at Space Mountain, we had to NDT every axle in that place. We had like 30 vehicles and 2 axles per vehicle. We had that thing done and put back together and running in one day, one evening. That was it. We did 3 or 4 cars, and then we fired it back up, and we ran those 3 or 4 cars while we cycled the rest of them out. But anyway, Duralube has done quite well for me, and if any of you guys decide to use it, I'm sure it will do quite well for you too. Okay, if you're putting together a lot of mechanical stuff, it's super great. Put it on there, wipe it off, and it penetrates into the metal, and it's great. Okay, thanks.